Hello, it's Richard Bowser here from Property Investor News magazine. Today I'm at the Great Buy-to-Let debate in London's Westminster, a stone's throw away from number 10 Downing Street and of course the home of the previous incumbent Chancellor, George Osborne, who brought in a number of tax changes which the landlord community was not too happy with. I'm here with John Heron of Paragon Mortgages. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Richard.
John, we had a very interesting debate here today and a very interesting talk by the keynote speaker, David Miles from Imperial College. You have made a number of comments as part of your role on the panel here today in respect of the implementation of Section 24 and also the 3% stamp duty and other things that are being done by this government to effectively, the words being used, attack private landlords. What are you seeing at Paragon in respect of the marketplace and its impact on buy-to-let landlords?
Well, I think the sector, the private rented sector, and private landlords in particular, are facing a number of really quite serious challenges. These have principally been driven by the fiscal changes that essentially George Osborne's regime introduced. Many of those, of course, haven't entirely impacted yet. In fact, the changes in fiscal policy that impact the tax relief that landlords would receive don't start to impact until April of this year. So they've got a long way to run yet. But we are already seeing really quite significant changes in the way landlords invest and the sorts of landlords that are investing. I guess the first significant change that we've seen is that there is clear pressure on the volume of transactions that landlords are engaging in. So whilst landlords, as we heard today, may not be selling up in any large numbers at all, they clearly are thinking long and hard about their new acquisitions. Indeed, we're seeing new purchases by landlords with buy-to-let mortgages 40% down on where they were a year ago. So that's quite a significant change. I guess the other most significant development that we're seeing is that there is a greater polarization between the types of landlords that we're seeing engage in the sector. A marked increase in terms of the activity on the part of professional landlords with larger portfolios, often holding those portfolios in limited companies. And probably less of an impact on landlords with one or two properties than you might have thought. What is clearly getting hit here are the landlords that were in the middle ground, maybe with 3, 4, 5 properties, because that clearly is disincentivized by the tax changes that we've seen.
So the sort of one or two, really one would say a pension substitution alternative landlord carrying on with their full-time careers. To some extent what you're saying is that you've not really seen a change there, but it's the sort of middle ground, perhaps 5, 7 properties where the impact is more or likely to be more pronounced in the years ahead.
Yes, I think that what we're seeing is that those landlords that are just buying 1 or 2 properties, particularly the overwhelming majority with just one, are willing to ride the changes in taxation for the benefit of that investment in what they still see as a very attractive asset. But if you're going to be have a more significant level of investment in the private rented sector, then you're going to have to be more professional about it, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Absolutely, I think the professionalisation amongst landlords is certainly a trend that's been growing in the last few years. Partly, the recovery from the 2008-2009, the need to make sure that profits were maximised. John, one of the comments that's been made by a number of people, and it was expressed in the room, was about government's desire to encourage what is known as the build-to-rent sector. What are your thoughts about the impact ahead of purpose-built rental accommodation being in greater supply, and how do you think that might impact on buy-to-let landlords, given all of the other factors or some of which we've just discussed?
Yeah, I think there are 2 clear policy themes there, and it's not just this government, frankly, that's been promoting them. They've been popular with governments for many years now. One is of the encouragement of a greater level of institutional investment in the sector, and recently that's gone hand in hand with so-called build-to-rent. I think both of those things should be encouraged. I think they can only help to ensure better provision of quality housing in the private rented sector. But what I don't like to see is politics of conflict that seem to discourage the private investor and encourage the corporate. These two things should happily coexist, and that, of course, would be to the benefit of the whole community.
Indeed, indeed. Obviously, there is more supply is coming in, and finally, what would you say? What would you say to our typical readership of Property Investor News? They are private landlords, typically with 5 to 15 properties, but many of them being doing sort of commercial land and planning now in the last 3 or 4 years. What would you say to them to sort of ensure that their property investment interests are positive in the years ahead? What would you suggest that they be doing? You mentioned the word professionalisation.
Yeah, I think if I reflect on what our landlords are talking to us about, I think that probably would give a sense of direction, and that is about getting organised, taking good quality advice, particularly around the impact of the tax changes, and thinking about how you best structure your existing holdings in property and obviously new acquisitions going forward. It seems clear that tenant demand will remain at very high levels. Indeed, the panel and the audience today seem to agree that we'd continue to see an increase in tenant demand. In that situation, there's going to be an increase in demand for the product, as it were, that landlords supply, property to rent. So the fundamentals are there that support their businesses, but it is crucial in order to optimize that opportunity that they get good quality advice and develop a strategy that best positions themselves for those changes.
John, thank you very much for those words of wisdom. Richard Bowser, Property Investor News, with John Heron of Paragon Mortgages here at the Great Buy-to-Let debate in Westminster.